writing proposals or supporting producing material without that involving my life as a scholar. But it's also very important for me to acknowledge that everything I write has a domestic worker talking in my ear, whispering in my ear, particularly Marcelina Bautista, Aida Moreno, who for example, as Mary pointed out about care, when I remember I wasn't comfortable with the idea of care work because I thought, well, maybe it's also because I ignored a lot of the discussions on emotions and subjectivities. No? However, when I found also the domestic workers were questioned the use of care as a way to render them invisible as workers, and workers of a different class, a different race, a different ethnicity, I certainly could not critically utilize the concept of care. Rather, I had to also analyze the political dimension of almost everything we write. And I do want to say something to Mary Castro about her path-breaking article on the alchemy of class, race, and gender about domestic workers during the very early 1990s. I think she really, it points out how there are scholars who think about intersectionality from the South in a different way, and are pioneering in that sense. And in terms of the historical thing, I started to work with an organization called Colectiva Atabal. Marcelina Bautista was also part of that group. A support group for domestic workers. Kind of makes you very critical of possible maternalistic tendencies that we might have as feminists. No, we were called out, and I really thank them for that. No, in terms of the organized domestic workers. No, I did not go to the founding Congress of Colactrao. I had a small child and was looking for work, and I didn't have the money. Marcelina went with another colleague from the Colectiva Esperanza, which formed part of Atabal at the time. And I remember that early on, the big discussion there was that domestic workers have to organize themselves. Other people cannot organize domestic workers. Ethically, politically, it's wrong, no? And over these, past 30 years almost, I would say that I've been sort of in a dialogue, which sounds pretentious because I also wonder how explicit that dialogue is, how much I share, and am willing to to debate my work with my domestic worker sisters now. I would say that one of the things that domestic worker, that Marcelina, Aida, Carmen Cruz have also always made me very aware is the importance that they speak for themselves, that they can think and organize, and then invite me if they like as an acompañante, no, as to accompany, no, because I think that I've been politically active on two fronts, really three, with here in Mexico with the union and with CASE, the Centro de Apoyo y Capacitación para Empleadas de Hogar, and also in Costa Rica with the Asociación de Trabajadoras Domésticas sporadically. The thing is, I can't do research without getting politically involved. At one point I was told that I should learn to keep a distance, but it's not part of me. No. I've done the work with the union in Uruguay, and I was really happy when I sent them my study. They were very happy about it as a way of sort of I don't know how you say it in English, a sistematización of their experience, no? And also constantly with Colactral, who for me has been really important part of my life over the since my 30s to my old age, no? So, and in this aciertos, I think there's some things of academics would be taking resources that in fact belong to domestic workers, no? Speaking for them or at them and not moving back, sort of, no? And I'm going to leave it at that. Okay.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias a las tres por.
Thank you very much to all three of you for this. And undoubtedly, in these times of pandemic, the context is a very necessary thing. Now, the questions will be based on the sanitary economic crisis that more than a passage, as said, it's a durable and irreversible change, and they forced us to reconceptualize the world. The questions would be how to confront, as researchers, the immobility that characterizes these times, and what would be the conceptual change to understand the importance of remunerated domestic work besides as compared to the other types of work. Thank you very much. Let's hear Mary Garcia. As to my personal situation as a researcher, I think the focus is the organized domestic workers, and there was no mobility. There was some impoverishment, unemployment, and many other problems. I have as a reference Brazil, and I insist that the organized workers have been very active, and they dominate the technology for virtual communication. And I'm very proud that I was accepted as part of their WhatsApp group. But I had many health problems, including mental problems. Many of my friends died, and we suffer from the isolation, and we are far away from the field work, and my own difficulties increased as difficulties for locomotion. Today, my field is virtual work. I work with young students, the WhatsApp with the National Federation of Domestic Workers. So when you ask about conceptual change, I consider very positive the diversity, not the diversity of theoretical and critical focus in the system of social inequalities, and the diversity of issues linked to domestic work, as we can see by the richness of the themes of the Congress. The concepts are part of the theoretical focus. It's very positive. There are greater diversity, and the analytical fields as the appeals to the decolonial feminism, Black feminism, the debate about recognition, and everything we can do to interconnect the structural critical thought and the analysis and revisit debates that have come since the 90s until now and that are very important, and its contemporaneity and the dehumanization of domestic workers, most of all if they are white, and the structural racism, the devaluation of manual work or domestic work, the political ideological aspect of patriarchalism, and the elements that structure society and that use the coloniality of the wisdom in terms of domestic work. These are some theoretical gains in the current studies, but they demand more emphasis in revisiting classical works as Fanon and Mariátegui. And today, once again, François Verger and Black feminists as Tolles, and the case of Brazil about ideology and whiteness, and alter and self-devaluation of domestic workers in the homes.
Muchas gracias. Mary Romero.
Thank you very much. Now, Mary Romero.
I've been catching up with the vast amount of new research
Eu estou me apropriando das novas
coming out about
pesquisas.
paid household
Sorry.
labor around the world. I have been particularly interested in the ways that visas are used to control workers and to link their presence in the country to their employer. Within the United States, I've tried to follow the legal arguments being made for the ways to establish labor law used in similar job situations that do have labor protections, such as requiring workers to stay overnight at their place of employment or other workers employed to work in the employer's home. I've been collecting online stories about paid household workers, which include not being provided protective masks, high layoff rates, and reports of employers not telling workers when they have COVID. Also, their experiences and challenges that they face as mothers when their children's schools go online. I think one conceptual change is to understand household work as state-regulated and unregulated. This makes a distinction between the conditions that the state protects or the parts of housework that is unprotected. For instance, the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights frequently protect only workers employed by the same employer for 40 hours a week. Even under the Bill of Rights, many work arrangements fall outside government regulations. Another conceptual change is to understand household labor in the framework of the dignity of work and decent pay and benefits, or dignity of work and workers' rights. Previous conceptual framework make these important issues invisible. Wages, sick leave, and benefits are important, but we seldom discuss safety issues, the use of cleaning products that are toxic, smelling of fumes every workday, chemicals injuries to the skin, to the eyes, nose. Employers do not feel obligated to tell the worker if they were vaccinated or if they have COVID, but are not reluctant about asking the worker if they have been vaccinated or have been around others with COVID. In the United States, there is a disdain for the unemployed, yet not all workers are treated with dignity, nor do we agree about fairness and justice when we are the employer, only when the employee or worker. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Mary Goldsmith.
Okay. I agree with Mary that working online certainly has taken its toll physically, anemically, and psychologically. No, as I have often commented with my friends, we are privileged in the sense that we have our work, that we have a job, we have our income. However, our work days are sort of the days seamless between work and anything else, sort of, no? In terms of, let's say, the political work with the CONLACTRAO, with the Confederación Latinoamericana de Trabajadores del Caribe, Trabajadores del Hogar. I would agree with what Mary says about, in fact, particularly during the first year of the pandemia here in Mexico, no, not in Mexico, in the Latin American countries that have affiliates to the CONLACTRAO, there was an increase in activism, online activism. Every Saturday or at 7 o'clock in the morning, we had a workshop on technology, which I also took, and I think I failed. Okay, but also the other thing which was fantastic was this network of women throughout Latin America who were domestic workers, who became tight with one another, close to one another, who offered a sense like a network, a support network, no? And one of the we worked around the question of memory and history with some of the founders of CONLACTRAO and the experiences in the different countries. I did not organize it. I was a participant, but there was a lot of organization behind this. And the secretariat of CONLACTRAO certainly, I think, ended up with a tighter bond than they would have had in non-pandemic times. Does that mean my time ran out? Mirza, please? No? Okay. So on one hand, I think that during the first year, we had a lot of political organizing, also a lot of shared strategies in terms of how to defend one's rights, how to protect one's health, and also how to protect one's family's health. And also, which I thought was really cool, was this sharing of CONLACTRAO's history and a respect for domestic workers who from the 1980s and 1970s, such as Nair Jaine, Adelinda Diaz Uriarte, Jenny Hurtado, among others. No? The thing that was interesting was when people started to go back to work, is a lot of women still would be involved in the workshops, in the public transportation with their cell phones, or during their breakfast at work. They closed the door, and which I thought was interesting in terms of the possibilities that they were able to create and use to fortify the domestic workers movement in Latin America. During the last year, it's been harder because most of the women have gone back to work. No? I also think, I was also involved with the protocols here in Mexico, when there was discussion with the labor ministry. And as you've mentioned earlier, the tendency still is to look at domestic workers as contaminating. Like Phyllis Palmer wrote about African-American domestic workers in the US now, when in fact, the people who often were the source of contagion were the employers, not the domestic workers now. And that was something that I worked with which I really felt honored to work with GASE and the union around these protocols in terms of the critiques that we had, the criticism we had, and suggestions we had for the Secretary of Labor. And also during the pandemic, I was carried out 2 projects. Some of the people are listening today, participants. We carried out a collective research about a pilot social security program for domestic workers in the state of Oaxaca. And it was, I think I really enjoyed it because I realized that the quality of the work was probably better then the quality of much of the quality of the work that I've done is sort of like very solo, no? And also with Colactrao, I've been involved with them on a shadow report about, or parallel report about the Convention 189, particularly about the lack of implementation of 189 in the countries in which it has been ratified, and also the reasons that it has not been ratified in countries such as Nicaragua, I'm sorry, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, which brings me to the question of concepts. The person who is, there's a Guatemalan scholar, Aura Gomez, Cachaquel anthropologist who's written about domestic work, colonialism, and patriarchy in Guatemala. And I think a lot of her ideas are really innovative. She argues that domestic work, paid domestic work, more than being a job or a study from the viewpoint of employment, should be understood as an institution, which is a pillar of patriarchy and colonialism to date in Guatemala. No, so I'll leave it at there. I think our time is ticking away.
Muchas gracias, Mary.
Thank you so much, Mary. Well, let's go to the last block of the section of questions, which is very short. So you can answer, only one of you can answer, or the three of you. The question is, this wonderful event is the first RITHAL Congress of 2022, and many researchers are working in addition to domestic workers. And the question for closure is, what is the message that scholars who are building their research on paid domestic work, what is the principle or the message you leave for the domestic, for the paid domestic workers as scholars? And why should we follow up on this question? And what is your guide to line to the next generations? These are the last questions of the section. I believe I'm really happy to be here with the three Marys here, researchers and union leaders in dialogue, participating in studies, not only exposing important problems, but getting to learn the conditions of life and families of the workers in their homes and their own relationships, and the discussion of the value of paid domestic work, including to strengthen the organizations and to pressure for public policies, and to discuss how to increase the level of surveillance. So, and how to decrease the gap between gains and the conditions of life. I have no message. I've been learning from RITHAL, I've been learning from domestic workers and the young researchers on paid domestic work in Brazil. Please follow up on the methodology by demand or by listening, quantitative, qualitative studies, discussion of the value domestic work to reproduce the system, and for a new future to go from surviving well to living well, which is proposed by university student feminists. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Mary Romero.
Thank you very much. Now, Mary Romero.
I'm going to keep my comments fairly short because I know we're running out of time. I think one of the things that needs to happen is that workers need to make women and gender studies programs and women's resource centers at the university aware of their existence, and they can begin a conversation with researchers, and they can begin to access their resources, which might include joint training programs around various topics, such as strategies to impact local and state government, leadership development, marketing skills, developing negotiation skills, and grant writing programs. They should follow the practice of other organized labor in establishing organizing internship opportunities for students, beginning a dialogue with feminist, labor, and justice studies researchers on campus to make them aware of the kinds of data that they need for grant writing and organizing efforts. And I recommend making the academic community part of your fundraising efforts.
Muchas gracias. Mary Goldsmith.
Híjole, que después de esta, what was, I told you, I think more in Spanish, after this stimulating discussion in terms of suggestions or messages, I would say to academics, particularly to young academics, I would suggest that they always, learn really to listen, but I mean really to listen to domestic workers, in terms of to think that domestic workers are also subjects of knowledge, that they also construct theory, and to listen to them as they do that, and also to give them credit for it, no? In their work. Also, I think even though it's hard to conceptualize that today, not to, that they also have an ethical responsibility in terms of returning their work in some form that is useful to the domestic workers, no? Particularly to the organizations, no? And to the general public, I agree with Mary Romero in terms of the importance of sharing skills that one might have as an academic in terms of grant writing, and also in terms of organizing workshops, in terms of constructing strategies whereby academics and domestic workers could pressure the government, and also to be generous with one's purse. If one has money as an academic, domestic workers always are requesting funding formally, not as some sort of maternalistic thing of like, ayúdame por favor, no? Because right now we're involved in a funding campaign for a domestic workers co-op here in Mexico, which I'm not that shameless. I will not put it here in the chat, but I will remind you during the upcoming days to contribute generously. No? Okay. And thank you. I think thank you.
Muchas gracias a ustedes. Bueno, vamos a dar inicio a preguntas de la audiencia. Nos han estado siguiendo por YouTube y también en esta reunión virtual de Zoom. Voy a ir dando preguntas una por una y pues podrán responder. Primero les mandan muchas felicitaciones varias veces y la pregunta es, en Brasil tenemos la presencia del sindicato patronal en Sao Paulo y acuerdos colectivos que establecen tarifas o remuneración para los diferentes servicios realizados. Los demás estados no. ¿Cómo ha sido la experiencia en otros países? Digamos, diferente a Brasil.
What was the experience like in other countries? The question was, in some local workers, in Sao Paulo, we have, in the state of Sao Paulo in Brazil, there is an employers union with collective agreements that pay differently to different services. But in the other states of Brazil, we don't have it. What is this like in other countries? Would any one of you like to answer? Okay, Mary Goldsmith. Yeah, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm back to mute. Let's say Argentina, I understand, has collective bargaining. And I would, let's say, I think you should probably get in contact with the unions there, the OPAC and the Sindicato de Personal de Casas y Familia in Córdoba, who have had experiences in terms of also negotiating between the unions. And I think they're Ligas de Amas de Casa, I'm not quite sure, and also a Sindicato de Amas de Casa, I won't translate, the Housewives Union, and
O
also the
sindicato
Housewives League of Housewives. Okay.
Donas de casa e sindicato de trabalhadoras domésticas.
I'm sure that one of my
Eu tenho
Argentinian
certeza de que uma de nossas tradutoras argentinas
colleagues could
ou de algumas colegas
more to that.
argentinas
And
estudiosas sabem disso.
Let's say in Uruguay, they've had I
No
think either
Uruguai,
5 or 6 collective bargaining agreements between the Sindicato Único de Trabajadores Domésticos, the oh, okay. I thought I lost the electricity. And the Liga and the Housewives League. And over this period, there are a lot of things that have been achieved. Particularly, they've discussed salary levels, different salary levels for workers. Particularly, they have elevated the salaries of those domestic workers who earn less. Also, they have negotiated a number of other issues, such as questions of additional pay if you work during the night, questions of uniforms. But there one issue which has been very problematic, which I understand that you have managed to negotiate in Sao Paulo, is the question of different wage levels for different categories of work. In Uruguay, they have not been able to reach an agreement on that, about that question, particularly because of the resistance from the Housewives League. And also I understand they have had that they have done some collective bargaining between the National Federation of let's say domestic workers in Chile, with organizations that represent employers. In Mexico, that has not been the case.
Muchas gracias.
The problem there is that most employers do not want to recognize themselves as employers. To begin, let's see.
Muchas gracias. La siguiente pregunta de la audiencia
The
es,
next question by the audience is, how do you consider that you can deal with the situation of indigenous women in domestic work? Could you recommend some study, please?
Here in the United States, most of it's historical research. One of the things that occurred in the institutes that were set up for African Americans, as well as the Indian boarding schools, was establishing domestic service for the women. And so there has been a lot of historical research on the kind of impact that that had on the indigenous communities. However, in the United States, the indigenous communities is off on the reservations, and so they're it's mostly where you find the large urban areas of domestic workers. So it's not an issue as it would be, like I'm sure, in other parts of the world.
muchas gracias.
Okay.
Mary Garcia.
Mary Garcia? Yes, in fact, I do not know any contemporary papers, but there must exist in Brazil. But I'd like to recall that at the level of the debate, political and economical debate, Mariátegui was one of the first at the end of the 19th century to warn that he thought it was absurd that the left wing in Latin America would not give more value and study the work of indigenous women, considering that indigenous women are domestic workers. He has about 3 papers about the importance of indigenous women as domestic workers and how they were important for any structure of home structure or with the relations between bosses and workers, and for possible changes in a revolutionary aspect. They are essays, and I really recommend them. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. También por el chat, Mary recomienda
Also through the chat, they recommend Piñara, Flores, Álvaro, and then Erin. Now, Erin, well, the other question that we have here for the public, well, beforehand, Mary is showing us a book, a text.
Mirza has an
Mirza.
article here, but also Aura Cumes has an article as well. And there are several other articles about indigenous domestic workers from different Latin American countries. Okay.
Muchísimas gracias. Entonces, pues muy
Thank you
recomendado.
very much.
And also in
I'm going to comment.
Iconos and Estudios Sociales, there are people from different students and professors from Flaxo who have Ecuador who have written about indigenous domestic workers and their organizing and question and other issues. No?
Muchas gracias. Entonces vamos a la...
So now we are going to the following question. What would be, in the homes, there is a trend to deny rights to the domestic workers on the part of the bosses. So in this aspect, I would like to know if you can share experiences of public policies on the inspection of working and health conditions for domestic workers.
Mary Garcia.
Mary Garcia. In Brazil, we have an act for the domestic workers, which is a legislation that was achieved with much struggle by domestic workers, organized domestic workers. And it would be the way of operationalize the convention of the ILO, through which they had to register to have documents, working documents, and they would have the access to social security, vacations, bonus, etc. There is this material. But what did the bosses do? A way of not doing this, what the legislation establishes, this legislation would be for domestic workers, the ones that slept in the boss's home, or for those who worked more than 3 days in the same home, are considered as having an employment with that boss, and they have working papers or contracts. But this has been happening for already 8 to 10 years. And in Brazil, most of the workers that have working papers or contracts, and they are a minority now, because the bosses resort to the daily workers that work only for 2 days, and then they don't have to comply with the legislation for employed domestic workers. But those who have their working contracts, less than 10% of them, less than 10% of the bosses have complied with this legislation, the program. In Bahia, recently, there was an experience of inspecting per sample some of these homes with bosses and domestic workers. How can you inspect a home, a household, how to get in? But if it is considered as a boss and the boss has a contract with the employee, the inspection can go into the home. So we must increase the number of women who are unionized and increase the knowledge of these domestic workers about. Someone said that there is a study by DIS where 75% of the domestic workers in Brazil have no contract, and those who have these contracts, only 11% of them have their total rights complied with by the bosses. The government is not doing what it should. As to the daily workers, it's a different case. They have no working papers, and they are daily workers. And there's a whole struggle of organized domestic worker to have a specific legislation for them, but we are still much behind that.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Mary Romero, Mary Goldsmith?
Mary Romero, Mary Goldsmith. Anybody would like to speak?
Just a very quick point about inspection is that one thing that is sadly the case in most countries is that there are not enough inspectors from the government. they usually have very few labor inspectors at the secretaries of labor. So we would need to, as I have been told, they need to increase the number of inspectors, and it's also very important that the inspectors are properly trained. That often it's considered that if they're a lawyer, if they've come from a union, then they know about labor inspection. But it really is like it is something that does require professional training, no? In order for them to carry it out effectively and significantly, no? And
Muchas gracias.
I'm sorry if I always bring up Uruguay. Uruguay at one point worked closely with the government, worked closely with the union. The union would tell them about where they thought there were violations of domestic workers' rights, because they would observe when, at what time the women were getting on the buses, let's say we're getting off the buses to go to work, and what time they would get on the buses when they were leaving, no? And then later they would do it like a random, supposedly random, the government would do a run random inspection in the neighborhood, which was also a way to, how do you pick which area of the city? How do you pick which households to inspect, no? And also the other, let's see, there was something which I thought was pretty cool in Uruguay, where even if the inspector did not go within the home, if you do have some sort of contract, which they have in the case where where they're registered for Social Security, there's like minimum information. At least if you can request that the receipts for Social Security payments are included, and they used to hang on the door, like as in the hotels where you say, "Do not disturb." They'd hang something on the doorknob of the employer's household, would say, "In this home, they respect domestic workers' rights," which, in terms of creating a culture of respect for domestic workers' rights. Jurema has all kinds of great comments.
Muchísimas gracias. En todo el chat hay...
Thank you very much. In the whole chat, there are many congratulations and celebrations, and many thanks for this wonderful dialogue and expressions from all of you. We would like to thank in a very special way for this meeting. This is a historical meeting. It was a privilege for me to moderate this event, and we thank the organizers, the sponsors that followed us up on this day, and also through YouTube. The session will be recorded in YouTube, and we we encourage all the people to watch the first Congress of the network about the research on the households about domestic work. And we still have some questions and a lot of dialogue that we hope that during the Congress we will be able to continue with. This is a historical moment. Thank you all very much, to the panelists, to all the organizers, and to all of our audience. Thank you, and let's hope it's not the last, but the beginning of many other dialogues. Thank you very much. Bye. And with this, we close this event. Good evening, and the Congress will start soon.